When we say that we are fearfully and wonderfully made by God, we should honor that as Christians. I am the temple of the Holy Spirit. And therefore, the purposes for which God created these organs should be led to function as God created them. Something that you might be proud of inside, but outwardly, you cannot be brave enough to say, this is what I practice. If there is that guilty conscience that is coming into you, then it is not the right thing. I welcome you to the platform for Boy Child by Grandma Rose. This is part 2 of the lesson LGBTQI+. Please, I urge you to share, to like, and to subscribe to the platform for Boy Child by Grandma Rose. The reason being that this information is going to help you. You get enlightened, you know some of the things that you did not know, and instead of getting blindly into some of these lessons, you'll be well informed. And a person who is well informed is actually better than the one who goes into something without any knowledge. Let's deal with LGBTQI+, as compared to our body physiology. The way God created us, it says that He created us in a wonderful and fearful manner. And therefore we have got the inlets and outlets in our bodies. And these inlets, we call them sphincters, but we just call them inlets and outlets. And we see that especially in our digestive system, we have some of them that are very crucial when we think about LGBTQ. Let me say that some of these openings, they are involuntary. That means it's only the brain that can open them. You cannot just open them at will. There is a reason why they open as the brain dictates. Then we have some others that are voluntary, and the ones that are voluntary, we can open them or relax them at will. Let us start with what we call the upper esophageal sphincter. This is where the digestive system connects with the airways. You know that after the food leaves the throat, it kind of goes down and then goes down to the stomach. And then the air that we breathe goes through the same passage. But the air does not go to the stomach. The air goes to the lungs. And therefore there is a small door that opens and it flips. When the food is passing, the airway will close. And then the food will go down. What happens when the food goes into the lungs? When the food goes into the lungs, even slightly, even water goes into the lungs, we see that a person starts coughing. And this is what I want to bring about. I want to show you that every time something happens contrary to how it was supposed to be, it creates a problem. So when we see food and fruits going into the lungs, that person will start coughing, they'll start tearing in the eyes, they'll start sneezing, and eventually, if there is a problem with swallowing, and if this food is going to lodge in the lungs, they develop respiratory pneumonia. So they get sick because their lungs get infected. And so that door will open and close. Only when the air is going in, it will open. When the food is going into the digestive system, it will close. And I'm comparing these inlets and outlets to a door. The way we open a door, like mine, when I go into my house, I open my door inside. So when I pull it out, it opens from the inside. And there are hedges at the door. These hedges, they hold the door and they make it open easily. If I go to open my door outwards, I'm going to damage it and it is not going to close properly. And this is what happens when we use these outlets and inlets in the wrong way. Then we go to the lower esophageal sphincter. This is the one that connects with your stomach. And let me tell you, it will allow the food that you have chewed to go into the stomach. And that food then will be digested in the stomach. That means that if that food comes up, if it comes back into the throat, we also find ourselves throwing up, or what we call vomiting. And sometimes when you vomit, it is so uncomfortable. We have seen children vomiting and sometimes coming through the nose, coming through the mouth, and they really cannot even breathe when that is happening. And the taste and the feeling of what is coming from the stomach, because the lower esophageal inlet has opened outwards. So when it opens, there are consequences, and it's not a very pleasant consequence. Let's go to the other sphincter that's called pyloric. And this one is the one that connects the stomach with the small intestines. And the food that goes into the intestine, it is partially digested. And when it leaves the stomach, it goes into the duodenum. And here it is exposed to the bile that comes from the liver, and it also has other digestive enzymes. The bile is very bitter. I know you have slaughtered chicken, and if the bile opens up and then goes into the meat, you cannot eat that meat. The bile is important because it will help to digest the food. But sometimes when there is a malfunction, that pyloric sphincter will open. And sometimes, especially when we throw up, we will see the bile coming up. That means we'll vomit all the food in the stomach, and then we start vomiting the bile. And when it comes into the mouth, it is yellow, it is bitter, it is very, very unpleasant, because that door that connects the stomach with the small intestine has malfunctioned, and it is taking the food or the partially digested food the wrong way. So when this keeps backing up into the stomach, and then we get kind of that air with some acid in it, this is when we get what we call the gas reflux. Gastroesophageal reflux disease comes from that. And it gives a kind of a burning sensation in the chest. And sometimes it is so uncomfortable, you can hardly sleep, because that gas by itself is a disease. And you have to take medicine to control the disease, and sometimes even surgery to tighten that opening. Let's now go to the other one, the sphincter of Oddi. This is where the pancreatic duct and the common bile duct, this is where they are connected to the duodenum. So the pancreatic duct, it has the digestive enzymes from the pancreas, and then the bile is delivered from the liver through what we call a common bile duct. So these enzymes are produced to further digest the food. So there is a reason why this sphincter of Oddi will open, to let out those enzymes so that the food can be digested. When the bile can no longer go through the bile duct and it backs up, we get stomach pain, and we also get severe chest pain. These are the consequences that I talk about. The food has been digested from the stomach to a certain extent, and then it goes into the small intestine, and there the digestion continues, and then it is digested to a certain extent. And this is when it goes to the ileocecal sphincter. And here in the ileocecal, it is involuntary also. And this is where the small intestine connects with the large intestine, and the partially digested food will go into the large intestines. If it is not digested to the level that it will be accepted in the large intestine, it will not open. that door is involuntary, from the small intestine to the large intestine. And this is the ending of the digestive system. And we see that the last opening or outlet, it's the anal sphincter. The anal sphincter will open so that the waste, the feces, will be able to leave the body. So what happens here? Because this is the part that is really interfered with. It has got two outlets. It has the one that is inside, the involuntary. That one can only be opened by the brain because it is opened by reflex action. And then we have the one that is voluntary. And what happens is that when your gut, the largest intestine, it is full and the feces is ready to go out, you feel it because your brain tells you. But what is very interesting is that even when I need to go to the bathroom to eliminate the waste, you cannot smell it. Because God created that door, the involuntary, to be so tight that you will not smell anything. You obey the brain by going to the toilet, by sitting on the toilet, and when you sit on the toilet, then you command the voluntary to open. The voluntary is now the last of the openings. The voluntary opens, the involuntary is commanded by the brain, and then the feces, the waste product from the body, comes out. What do I want to mean by this? I want to say that LGBT is messing up that door. It is messing up that opening. It is going not only through the voluntary opening, it's also going through the involuntary opening. And we know how the involuntary was created by God, that even when air is coming out, it comes out in a way, even if you try to prevent it, it will still come out in a way that it is coming from a very tight spot. That's when sometimes you hear it making a noise or making a sound, a whistling sound, because it is coming from a very tight spot. What happens when that passage is used for sex? Those muscles will be loosened up. What God meant for the brain to open will no longer be opened by the brain. And once they are tampered with, they are not going to be effectively functional as they were functional before, because they are loosened up. I have heard a young man saying, I was involved in gazing and I now change 5 diapers in a day. What a sad thing. This man is no longer productive because he cannot work, he cannot be in the public. He is now being taken care of by his family, and just because he went and involved himself in tampering with those outlets and the inlets that were created by God. So we come to understand that the digestive system is just meant for the digestive system purpose. It is a one-way, like one-way traffic. Like when I'm going from Karatina to Nairobi, and then there is the dual carriage. I'll just take my side of the road. I'll not take the other side of the road. This is a no entry point because it should only be exiting the waste product. When we say that we are fearfully and wonderfully made by God, we should honor that as Christians. And also the other thing is that I am the temple of the Holy Spirit. And therefore, the purposes for which God created these organs should be let to function as God created them. Some of the relationships with the people that doing this are affected. Families can no longer accept you. And when something like that happens to this young man, whose exit now was broken down, and he could no longer hold the feces, where do you end up? You end up in your parents' home, or you end up with the loved ones, and then you become a problem with them. And let me tell you, that exit cannot procreate. It cannot give you children. Even for the women who are going like woman to woman, there is no way they can be able to do what God had intended. And this is why we have got so much of sexual toys that are being used, because for sure they cannot satisfy each other. So I'm urging you, before you think of going there, know that even mentally, this is going to eat you. Something that you are doing, something that you might be proud of inside, but outwardly, you cannot be brave enough to say, this is what I practice. If there is that guilty conscience, just a fraction of the guilty conscience, that I'm doing something that others should not know, I'm doing something that others cannot be proud of, I'm doing this and I cannot discuss this with my mom, and I cannot discuss this with my dad, I'm doing this, but I wouldn't like my age mates to know. If there is that guilty conscience that is coming into you, then it is not the right thing. Let us try to talk about it. Let us try to see whether we can get counseling. Let us try not to go into it blindly, because it is maybe a pressure just for a time, but it may not be lasting pressure. Thank you so much for listening to me. I continue to urge you to subscribe to the platform for Boy Child by Grandma Rose. You can see that I'm going into very interesting topics that are almost untouchable, but I feel we better, me and you, discuss them so that you know your stand and you know what God intends of you. God bless you so much.